Hello everyone and welcome back to another brand new GP25 video. Now today we're here to look at the controller calibration settings and to play around with them and give you my settings. Now there is a lot that you can do with these and I'll explain them in depth. I've done this video for the last 3-4 years now and it's nearly always gone down as probably my most viewed video on the GP cycle. So it's always been a good video, but here we are now again for 2025's version. To get to the menu, you have two options you can do while you're in the pits, or you can do what I'm going to do here. Just go to time trial, top right corner, see the X will be square on a PlayStation controller, and then bang, up and here you go, and then you go across to calibrations, and here we are. So we have steering, acceleration, throttle, front brake or reverse, rear brake, and clutch and rider weight. Now I'm going to just give you a quick little run through of what these actually do and what they do in terms of how they'll feel in game. It's quite easy for me to kind of riddle off a brief description without really showing or telling what it really does when it comes to controlling a bike in game. Just before we get into it, if you do press down on the right stick, it does give this little menu on the side. So for example here, if you didn't know what the cornering input modulation does, you can see there when it's enabled. Managing corners will be smoother in the case of sudden changes. The bike becomes a bit more mobile and stuff like that, but it does actually work for everything else. If I go down and want to read what a dead zone is, it does like that. So again, you can always revert back to the video and watch it a couple of times if need be, or you have a small little brief description on the right side. Also, before we get any further, if you press X on an Xbox controller or square on a PlayStation controller, you'll get this little window tab here. This will show your in-game calibration preview, so I can press buttons and see how the input acts in-game once I've changed it. Now, this is great to see, but a lot of people, these graphs moving up and down and doing stuff like this won't really make much sense. So the best thing to do is just go on track. It'll either feel good or feel bad. You'll kind of know straight away if you like it or not. So it's handy here for today's video because I can show off things as I change them. But yeah, let's get into actually explaining now what everything does. So first thing is the dead zone. Now I'm fairly sure if anyone who's played a game at any point in their life on controller would pretty much know what a dead zone is. A dead zone is just how much you have to move the stick in terms of steering to get the input to apply. So for example, 0, if I have the, actually I put up to 25% at the moment. And we go to the in-game one. So I move my stick quite a bit before anything is registered. What I will do actually is I did this last year as well. I'll put my actual controller on screen so you can see my inputs. So now you can see me pressing all these buttons and stuff. So my left stick that I'm moving now is my actual rider leaning. So when I put a dead zone, see I'm moving the stick left to right and very little of the input has been picked up. So that is basically what your dead zone is. So we're going to go back now. I'm actually going to take that back off before I forget. So next up is linearity, which is for me the most important thing in the controls calibration window at all. So it allows you to have a slower part of motion in certain part of the actual input on the controller. So again, we are controlling the steering here by me having on. So just to explain it, you have 50 to 200%, 100% is your 0, we'll say. That is your 1-to-1. So that means the stick will move exactly the same speed of the input in game. So if you put the stick fully left really fast, it'll go exactly like that. There'll be no smoothing or speed ramping or anything. Where if you want, we'll say, just for argument's sake, you want the first part of the movement to be a lot quicker, so you want the bike to lean in much faster, what you would do is you decrease your linearity and that will speed up the very initial input, and then as you get down to the real last bit, it goes really nice and slow. But what a lot of people find is really good in this game, because the bikes are a bit lethargic, there's a bit of kind of built-in in-game lag, especially through the controller where you change direction, it feels like the bike is a bit lethargic. For me, you can see 85%, so that basically what I've tried to do is just speed up the initial bite of my controller so that my first input of turning left or turning right or changing direction is just slightly sped up. Now, the faster you speed up the first part or the last part of it will also kind of control how slow the other part of the motion is. So again, to keep it as kind of basic and simple as possible, if you speed up the first half of the input as fast as possible, it will then make the second half quite slow, because your point A to point B will always be the same speed. It just depends on how fast you want to be in the middle at certain points, if that makes sense. Now it says on the right hand side, it changes linearity to achieve greater precision in the lower or upper part depending on your input. So basically what I've tried to do is I want in a sense greater precision at high lean, but that just gives me a quicker change of direction because the input is actually seen as faster until we get to about 50%. It is quite technical, I know. I'm probably not doing the greatest explanation of it. The best thing to do, and I always suggest to do, is get on track, do some laps, change it from 50%, oh my god, the bike is unrideable, turns in so fast, put it to 200%, oh my god, it doesn't turn, it's just completely immobile. Play around with it. It's nearly always better in my eyes not to have it on the default, especially when it comes to the linearity of the steering. I just feel that the game has too much of a dead zone built in, and a bit of an input lag that you need to kind of just tinker with these just slightly to get the game feeling a bit better. So next up is saturation. This is a pretty simple one. Your saturation is the max amount of input you can use. For me, it's set to 0, which is 100%. So that means that, for example, we're going to put this now to 200%. And if I bring up the in-game calibration for the steering, what it'll mean, if you watch my controller once again, is that I only have to barely move my stick at all. So if you look at my right stick, look how much further I can move it, and there's no input because I've moved my saturation so far down that by going half stick, I'm hitting 100% of my input, which this would do in game is make it really sensitive. It would be pretty much unplayable, but it would make it really sensitive. So again, you can see I barely have to move my stick to go from full left to full right. So your saturation is just moving your end point in your controller. Again, if you can't really get the right feeling from the linearity, maybe try increasing your saturation. What you can do is speed up some of the input and slow down some of the input with the linearity, and then change your end saturation point with the saturation. Again, I'll give you my setups and you can try all my settings as best you can. Try your own ones too. I always kind of advise people to experiment, to play with these games, because what will work for me doesn't always work for other people. So again, I'm trying to give you the information so you can go down the route of doing it yourself, but also keep in mind if you want to just bang in some settings that are known to work. Now the next two are filter pressure and release. Now these are pretty basic, but also quite impressive what they do. So filter pressure, it basically slows and smoothens your input from when you're pressing the button. So where this comes in really handily is where you're not using a trigger, where you're using a mechanical button. So for example, my rear brake is bound to right bumper, and if I put my filter pressure really high, me clicking on the button, it won't go from 0 to 100 quickly. It'll go nice and smooth and slowly. So what you can do is you can make it feel more like a trigger by having that filter pressure that'll allow you to build up to the end point of your input much more kind of smooth and consistently. Filter release is the exact same thing. It's when you release it, it doesn't go from 100 to 0 immediately. It goes maybe a bit slower and slowly, just like a nice smooth graph as it just tails off the input and smoothens out. Now I'll have that set up on other things. On the steering input, I wouldn't recommend it, because as soon as you get off the steering or you change direction, you want your input to be immediately matched to what you're doing, and the smoothing is really good for other things. Steering is not where we have it. Now I have explained pretty much everything, so now we're going to just go through my settings and I'll give a bit of an explanation why I've done certain things and how it'll affect in game. So I'm just going to run quickly through the steering just to give the values, not have to explain everything again. So dead zone for me, 0%. Pretty much everything in this game will have a 0% dead zone. I have a FlyDigi Vader 4 Pro controller. It's a pretty decent high-end kind of esports controller, and it has Hall effect joysticks and stuff, so it's really good in terms of its one-to-one tracking stuff. So I don't need any dead zones or anything like that. The only time I'd ever recommend a dead zone is if you have a really worn controller. But at the same time, you're nearly being penalised a lot in this game by having a dead zone on. So I really wouldn't recommend dead zone in any kind of facet of the game, really. Linearity, I already kind of mentioned this, the 85%. It just is to smooth up the very first touch of the lean. So as I just begin to lean, he just leans in a bit faster. And then as I get down to the more serious stuff at high leans, it's a bit more slower. It's just how I like it. It's been what I've done for the last couple of games. And it just gives me a bit of overall better feeling with tipping the bike in. Saturation 100%. Again, I wouldn't go anything above that, because your window of opportunity to move your left stick from right to left gets shortened, which means you have to be even more precise in a smaller window. We've already covered filter pressure and release. Like I said, don't recommend running it at all on the steering. It just wouldn't make sense to have a emotion that you need to be so precise and consistent. Have any smoothing on it just wouldn't work. So next up is our throttle, accelerator, depends what you call it. Again, dead zone, we already know what dead zones are at this point. Don't want a dead zone. You want your throttle to be nice and reactive. You want it to be exactly where it is. To be honest, most people, I'd say 99% of the community, have their throttle and front brake bound to their triggers on the controller, which means that you don't want any dead zone on your triggers. They don't really wear in the same sense that joysticks will wear. So again, 0% on your dead zone. You do not want anything. Now the linearity for the throttle, it will smoothen out your input like we've already talked about. Having it at 160% means my initial touch of the throttle is nice and smooth. So again, it's kind of similar in a way to the filter pressure. So when I get on the throttle from maybe 0% to 30%, it's a bit slower. No matter how hard I grab the trigger, the input will always nicely come on. It will nicely kind of drift on. It will never snap on, even if I am a bit aggressive on the controller. I have it set up in the game so that my control input will always be nice and consistently smooth. So no matter what way I ride, no matter what way I'm trying to do on track, it'll always give me that nice, smooth initial touch of the throttle. And again, if you go up to 200%, the input will be smoother for longer, and then the very last bit will be a bit snappy. I find 145 to 160 is my sweet spot I found in this game. I have changed this since they updated it a few times. That's why this video has taken a bit of time. Some bits have been tweaked, so I just wanted to make sure that the video wasn't kind of null and void soon as the game got updated. So I think we've had a couple of updates now. Not really expecting anything more, especially with the tire update when the kind of phantom spin went away. That was a big thing I changed with the linearity. But for me, 160%, again, 145 to 160 was a sweet spot I found, where it just smooths up my first input nice and easily onto the throttle. It basically just stops you from having any snapping on the throttle, regardless if you put it in game or not. So 100% saturation, again, don't need anything more than that. All it would do then would just make you'd end up nearly with like a quarter throttle, if that makes sense, where you have way less of a movement to manage your whole throttle input. So again, wouldn't recommend adjusting saturation at all on the throttle. Filter pressure, I run this at the moment between 5 and 10%. At the moment I'm 5, so basically, again, like we said, it's just that when I press the button, the filter pressure just smooths out my input a bit more. So top of that, with the linearity, it just gives an overall nice smooth throttle. So no matter, again, like I said, no matter what way I press the trigger, even if I'm not smooth as the player myself, my controller will add nice smooth input to the game. And I have played with the release on, but I found a couple of times that I'd get off throttle hard on the brake, and I'd have a slight overlap where I'm on throttle and on front brake, and it really upsets the bike. So I wouldn't recommend running it, to be honest, just because even at the really low levels, you still can get them kind of overlaps where you're on throttle, on brake, and that just doesn't really work. Next up is our front brake. Now again, it's a pretty important one. Front brake dead zone, again, I'm at this point now, I'm going to just completely skip over the dead zone. You do not want a dead zone in any shape or form. Linearity, this one is again very similar to my throttle. My thought process is quite similar, that it's slightly to the 25, so the 125%, so it's up by 25%, and that just gives my very initial grab the brake just a small bit of smoothing, which just stops the bike stopping. It just allows the weight transfer to be more natural and smooth. It means in the wet I can be more aggressive on the brakes without getting penalized. It means a lot of things for me. Now I could probably push this up to about 135, maybe even 140, but I found 120, 125 at the moment is my sweet spot in game, and I'm pretty happy with that. Saturation, wouldn't really adjust it again on the brakes. Now what's cool on this is on the brakes you can actually go below 100%, which means that you'll never hit the end stop. And what that will look like is this. So if I put it there to 75%, and if I show you my front brake now, I can't get to the end of my input. You can see I can only get 75% no matter how hard I press the trigger. I'm only allowed 75% my brake. Now you might wonder, where would that actually come in useful? On other games you can actually have it set up like that as well, where you just take a few percent off. So if you find that when you get to 100% brake pressure that the bike becomes a bit nervous, you could put it down to 97%, so you just don't get that last bit where the bike gets a bit floaty. There is small little, you're getting quite detailed if you're going that far, but there is ways you can actually go under, and we will actually see it in a second that there is something I do personally where I lower my saturation. Filter pressure and release, I run 5% pressure. Again, you just want that nice, well, I want personally, is that nice smoothing effect when I get on the brake hard, because I like to get really aggressive on the brake and I don't want to be penalized by the game kicking me off. And on the release I have 10%. I just like to think if you get off the brake too aggressively, there can be a bit of a wobble, a bit of a weight transfer. I like to have that just on 10%. It just again slows the input coming off, which allows you to just keep the weight balance in the right place, and it doesn't really upset the bike as much. Now, I was saying a while ago about the saturation. We're here now with the rear brake. I only run my rear brake at 75%. Now, the whole reason is that if you have the rear brake up at 100%, it's actually too strong. If I have it at 75%, it's much better for wheelies. It's much better for drifting the bike in, for controlling the slide, and it's really nice. And again, because like I've mentioned that my rear brake is mapped to my RB button, this button here, so I'll actually show you that's my rear brake there. Having it mapped to that button just makes it easier if I have the saturation slightly lower, but then I have a really high filter pressure, so it becomes more of a nice smooth input. So it's almost like a trigger where I can press it and it doesn't immediately go to 75%. It'll smoothly get to it, and you kind of, there's a kind of common theme with my controls that I like to smooth things out and have real consistency and kind of be butterly smooth through my inputs. That's how I like to ride the bike. I like to be smooth, consistent, precise in many ways, and that's what really helps me with my game. Especially having these kind of filter pressures turn on, it just allows me to maybe get a bit more aggressive with the controller but not pay the price in game. Finally then, you have the clutch and the rider weight. Personally, don't really have anything much done to these at all. You could do a lot of things with them, really. You could play around a lot. The clutch, to be honest, the game doesn't really simulate a clutch working that well, so you can just dump the clutch and be away with it. There's no simulation of needing to get the bike point, so for me it wouldn't really work. Haven't done much with the rider weight. Again, I feel like adding any kind of smoothing or any dead zones to the rider weight would just make the game a bit more lethargic, which is not something we could do. You could technically play with the linearity to get them a bit more quicker, but I felt it didn't really work as well as the steering input, and I found that much better. But I think we're going to end it there. It's a long enough video again for me just going through a couple of settings. If you have any questions, drop a comment down below, and you can reach me as well on my Discord. There will be a link to that in the description. I'm much more active over there. It's a much faster way to get in contact with me. But anyway, hope you have enjoyed. I hope these settings work for you. Let me know what your thoughts on these calibration videos are, and I shall see you in the not so distant future for another Motogp 25 video. Thanks for watching. Slán go fóill buachaillí.